Our vision is to give every student in Great Britain an opportunity to hear and respond to the gospel of Jesus Christ. Well, hello everybody and welcome to PEP Talk. Thank you for joining us for this episode. I'm Gavin Matthews from Solus and I'm joined as ever by my colleague, Dr. Simon Wenham. Simon, how are you?
Very well, thank you. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Now, I used your official academic title because studying all that time, you must have been a student a long time, maybe even longer than I was. How many years did you clock up studying?
Oh, that's a very good question. I guess it was about a decade, but I did some study part-time. And if it's any consolation, I've forgotten most of what I studied in that period.
Now, many of us look back on our student days with great fondness, not just because we had way too much fun, but also because it was some of the most fruitful and enjoyable times of evangelism too. You know, some of the best times we had in mission were as students. So I'm delighted this week to welcome onto PEP Talk Matt Lillicrap, who leads an organisation called UCCF. You'll hear about them in a moment. Matt, welcome. How are you?
Good, thank you. It's really good to be here.
And you're dialing into us from where in the world this morning?
So I'm based in Cambridge, although UCCF is based in Oxford. So I guess you could say we've got both of those particular university bases covered.
You lead an organisation called UCCF, which is quite well known. But for the uninitiated, tell us, UCCF, who are you and what do you do?
Yeah, UCCF stands for the Universities and Colleges Christian Fellowship. We've been in existence for nearly 100 years, and we, at its most basic, support Christian students who are part of Christian unions in universities to live and speak for Jesus, to live out their faith as faithfully as they can, and to speak out their faith as boldly as they can. And we particularly support the leaders of those Christian unions in forming the Christian union community and sharing the gospel on campus.
Great, thank you. And you've been leading the ministry for about a year and a half. How has it gone? And are there any things you can share about the sort of what it's been like at the helm of this organisation that's been going on for a very long time?
It's been, in some ways, a bit of a whirlwind for me personally. So my background initially was in medicine. I studied medicine. So I've been a student about 9 years of my life in total. So I don't know if I've got much on you, Simon, but I did 5 years of medicine, worked as a doctor for about 8 years, was doing some student work along the way with medical students, allied to the Christian Medical Fellowship, and then student work in local church. And then I studied theology, did that for 4 years, and was a pastor. That's how I ended up in Cambridge, was a pastor at Eden Baptist Church, and then pastored a church called Hope Community Church, Cambridge. And so I sort of feel a bit like I've had three. This is the beginning of a third life. I've done medicine in hospitals, I've done local church pastoring, and now I'm doing this, whatever this is, so organizational leadership of a ministry, UCCF. And so it feels like there's been quite a big learning curve, quite a steep learning curve for me, sort of learning how to lead an organization. We have about 100 staff, maybe about 50, 60 volunteers working with us, let alone the students themselves, with about 1,800 student leaders, probably somewhere between 8,000 and 10,000 students engaging regularly with Christian unions. So it feels like quite a big thing. That's across all of England, Scotland and Wales. And so I've been learning a lot about how to lead an organisation that's spread out geographically. But the biggest thing has been the real joy of leading an organisation that wants to make Jesus known and wants to live for him deeply. We talk a lot about staff wanting to do our ministry in 3D, we call it, delighting in Jesus more deeply, that we might display him more fully and declare him more boldly. And the whole point of doing that as staff is that the students might be on mission in 3D, doing exactly the same thing, delighting in displaying and declaring Jesus in their university contexts. And that really is just a source of great joy. With all the challenges that come with leading the organisation, caring for staff as well as possible, making sure that we're learning lessons of some difficult periods that UCCF has been through in recent times, and really proceeding with learning those and putting those lessons into practice. The biggest encouragement is seeing that the gospel remains powerful. Students continue to share the Jesus they know, and students continue to encounter the Jesus they know. Those who know him grow in their faith more deeply during their time at university, which was my experience. And those who don't know him, many of them, they encounter him for the first time, which was actually my mum's experience at university, which is one of the reasons I love this ministry so deeply.
Wonderful. And we're recording this in the first quarter of the year, which is obviously a really significant time for CUs around the country when they do their events week. And presumably you get feedback on that. I mean, I'm so old that in my day it was travelling secretaries filing field reports. That dates me somewhat. But I'm sure you get a sense even today, although the terminology has changed, from the ground, what's been going on? I know that the CUs have been really active in the last month. We've been involved in Solus in 3 or 4 of them. What sense are you getting of what's been going on around the country and how it's been this year?
Yes, so between the first week of February, maybe just about the last week of January, a couple of CUs in Scotland, I think, managed to sneak a couple of their events weeks in before February, all the way through to sort of kind of mid-March, second week of March. We see about 85 Christian unions running events week up and down England, Wales and Scotland. Some of those are small Christian unions really making significant efforts to run 3 or 4 events in a week. Many of them, the majority of them, are large events kind of with talks happening at every lunchtime in a central venue on campus, and then talks happening every evening as well, seeking to kind of engage with apologetics and to proclaim the gospel. And so it's an amazing time of year every year. I loved it when I wasn't working for UCCF and I got the opportunity to go and speak at some of these events and hearing a few stories from friends who are doing the same. And now I get the front row seat where I get to hear, we don't call them field reports quite anymore. It's more sort of gather from CU staff workers. So we get those in, and I've actually got one on screen in front of me. Just came in this week. A student at Worcester went along to an event last term, was really intrigued by what she saw, but what she heard, but actually also what she saw, really enjoyed the kind of community sense of the Christian Union, which I think is really significant. It's a really significant part of what a Christian Union is. It's that sort of displaying the Lord Jesus, I guess the sort of thing that Paul calls the aroma of Christ, that to some people is the aroma of life, right? That the Lord's people exhibit. And then this person came along again after Christmas, and a CU member started chatting with her, and she was saying, I'm more and more interested. And just during an event earlier on in the term, she made the decision that she wanted to follow Christ for the first time. And I think that's just one indicative story of the sorts of things we're hearing. A lot of the time, it's students who have engaged for the first time, perhaps with the Christian Union over the last few months, have got to know some of the Christian Union students, and then have come along to events during their events weeks and have heard the gospel proclaimed clearly, not necessarily for the first time, but for a decisive time, and have turned and trusted in Christ. And it's beautiful. We see it replicated up and down the country. And it does feel, I know that we're going to chat about this, it does feel a little bit as though that we're just seeing a bit of a tendency towards a greater openness among the students that we're encountering in those weeks, which is really exciting.
Thank you. It's interesting you mentioned the aroma of Christ. We're featuring Peter S. Williams, the philosopher, in our next PEP Talk, and actually he has a big thing about apologetics having a much wider sense of what it is, including imagination and the aroma of Christ, as in how we act as Christians. So it's interesting you mentioned that. So do look out for that episode. We'll be saying a little bit more on that. I suppose one thing that is interesting is obviously the questions that students are asking. Do you have a sense that of what sorts of questions people are seeking with in universities? And is it their kind of specialism? So if you have science students that are asking science questions, or are there more universal questions that a lot of people are asking on campuses?
Oh, I think what's been fascinating for me to watch over the last 10 years or so, and so the last 20, I was a student in 2001 to 6, so the last 20 years, 25 years, has been the way in which those questions have shifted. The questions that are related to specific kind of specialties, the scientists with questions around science and religion, haven't gone away, but they have changed in quality a little bit. Where 25 years ago we were having that question asked as how this can't possibly be true, can it? There's absolutely no way Christianity can be true because science has clearly disproved it. We're now getting questions which are much more coming from this seems like it could be really good. and therefore is it true? Are often the sorts of questions that we're seeing asked. And as society and culture has shifted, and particularly in the last 5 years, as I think post COVID, there's this greater sense that I think 2 or 3 things have happened. One is that the sort of scientific naturalism that has promised purpose and meaning from within this world and nothing outside of it has just been found wanting. It hasn't delivered that purpose and meaning that people crave. And I think young people, Generation Z, it's been talked about a lot, but that student generation are feeling that and are at the front end of it. At the same time, the sort of secularism that has promised utopia just hasn't delivered it, and people are starting to look and go, well, maybe we need to search for something more. And it seems that there's that real search for. It is probably used sort of universalized idea of questions, things like purpose and meaning, belonging and acceptance, and a connection with something beyond, a sort of a desire for a higher power. That's what Dan Strange calls it, isn't it? One of his 5 magnetic points. There's the central one. And it seems that a lot of the questions that float around are all circling around those sorts of themes. How can I find these things? And so we're finding ourselves answering questions and asking questions like, why do humans long to belong? And it's that interesting asking of why. Why is it that I'm wired this way? What is it about reality that means that I have these longings and desires that push me in particular directions to find connections, to seek acceptance, to overcome shame, and all the rest of it? Why am I wired this way? And I'm often led back to that quite famous C.S. Lewis quote when he talks about the desires in our hearts and talks of our need for our hunger, revealing that we are designed for a world in which physical food exists. And then that famous quote that he says, if we find in our hearts a desire which is not met in this world, the only logical conclusion is that we were made for another. And I think that often feels like the theme, many of the themes that we're finding students engaging with.
There's certainly a new openness. I think, all our speakers go out will say that. Is calling it a quiet revival over-egging it, do you think? Or would it be better to call it a new openness? What's your sense? Because obviously there's a bun fight about the stats in the wider country. How's it looking on the campuses? What's your sense of that?
I think it's such an important question. I wrote a short piece for Premier Christianity magazine last month, in which I essentially just argued we need to stop arguing about whether or not it's the statistics, what the statistics show, and get on with what's in front of us, proclaiming the gospel in an opportunity. And I really think that's key. So I sort of I don't want to duck the question, but I kind of want to say, in one sense, it's not as relevant as we're making it. The arguments about the statistics are really neither here or there. The question is, there's a person in front of us who is searching, and often searching spiritually. They're searching for something, and we have the someone who is the end of that search of something. He's called Jesus, so let's share him. So I sort of want to slightly duck the question. I think there is a danger in using the word revival, which has made some Christians think, oh, well, that means that God's doing it all, isn't it? And he's just going to bring people into the churches. And we're hearing wonderful stories of people walking into church for the first time off the back of their own searches. But I think the danger is that we sort of just drop the ball and going, the people are out there, they need to hear the gospel. So let's get out, in UCCF's terms, let's get out into the campuses and equip the students who are already there, who know Jesus, to share him. And so I think I would concede there is an enormous shift in the spiritual temperature. That's what I would say. Call it a spiritual awakening or a growing spiritual awareness. I think that is evidently true. But that is a spiritual hunger which is leading people in any and every direction towards, Marcus Aurelius is having his own quiet revival at the moment as young men turn to Stoicism. But then the Islamic societies are reporting increasing engagement on campus as well. And witch talk is growing faster than ever, sort of capital P paganism on social media. Our staff workers are being asked to speak on topics like manifesting, meditation, crystals and tarot, just as frequently as they're being asked to talk on, is the Bible reliable, or can I believe in a God when science has explained lots of things, or whatever else it might be. That's the temperature we're in. So I really wish they'd called it, rather than the quiet revival, they'd called it something like the massive opportunity, just to kind of wake up that in culture that something has shifted, which is making us ask these questions more fervently, particularly making young people ask these questions more fervently.
Hi, it's Gavin from Solas here. I hope you don't mind if I just interrupt this program for a couple of seconds to tell you that on the Solas website, there's loads more information about sharing your faith, very much in tune with the sort of thing that you'll hear on the PEP Talk podcast. There's articles, there's videos, there's other podcasts, there's any number of resources on there to help you address difficult questions, share your faith at work or with neighbours or friends. There's a wealth to explore. Come over and have a look at solas-cpc.org and see what you can find. And now, back to the programme.
I mean, you obviously represent a ministry connecting with students. Would you say students are a particularly important group of people or demographic in our society today?
I mean, I think in one sense, obviously I'm going to say yes, I think they are, because I head up an organisation that works with students. I think I want to say it's easy to over-egg that a little bit. There's nothing magic about being a student, and there is nothing magic about the ages of 18 to 21, or whatever it is. It's kind of averages 18 to 25 for undergraduate students. But the reason I think they're important, around about 2.5 million, about 50% of the UK population of 18 to 25-year-olds end up at university. The average age of starting university has actually gone up a little bit over the last few years. So it's not just 18-year-olds. That's why it's sort of 18 to 25 rather than 18 to 21. But that is a key moment. My wife is a child and adolescent psychotherapeutic counsellor, and often reminds me that the science suggests that adolescence doesn't finish until at least age 25, perhaps even as late as age 33. And that there are all sorts of things that are sort of up in the air in so many ways already for just being in that age group, whether that, emotionally, psychologically, biochemically. But we then add a sociological kind of up in the airness as well to moving people out of home, often aged 18, or they're commuting from home into a new environment, which is far more, I quote, adult than school has been. It's a melting pot of ideas. Universities, they're going through an institutional crisis at the moment. I would argue that they don't really know what they're meant to be, but at their best, they've always been an incubator of ideas, and a place where they can be discussed and wrestled with. And so these 18 to 25-year-olds are entering an environment in which so much is up for grabs. And who they are going to be, who they are, is the big question, possibly the biggest question of our day: is what is a human and who am I? And that question is being kind of almost forced on them, even if they don't want it. Often they do want it, but it's almost being kind of confronted. They're being confronted with it simply just by where they are and when they are in our this way our society is structured. And so you kind of want to say, yes, without over-egging it, there's still 50% of 18 to 25-year-olds in the UK who are not in university who need to hear the gospel. But half of them are. And it is also a key moment for Christians themselves, as was my experience, to stand on their own 2 feet, make an ownership of their faith, and often learn the ropes of what it actually means to share Christ and to live for him in a way that they haven't quite done up until that point.
2.5 million students, I think you said, in the UK, something like that. Many of those coming from abroad. Are there lots of international students around? And are there opportunities to share the gospel with them? And where are they coming from?
Yeah, thanks, Gavin. I mean, yes, 1 in 4 students that UCCF works with tend to be international students. It's a little less than that in the overall population is somewhere between 1 in 5 and 1 in 4 students. Significant numbers of international students. In the past, many of them would have been coming from East Asia, from China, from Hong Kong, and that still is true from Malaysia. But over the last few years, we've seen huge influxes of international students to the UK from the Indian subcontinent, from India, from Pakistan, from Bangladesh. And so the international student landscape has shifted quite significantly. The opportunities remain enormous to be sharing Christ with students from countries where Christianity may be a minority, may even be an outlawed religion. And I have a few friends who've gone back to China, having encountered Christ at university, who are now leading churches in China. And we love to work with international students. We also love to partner, particularly with Friends International, who are close partners who work with international students. And essentially, they do this. They aim to do the same work we do with international students specifically, and they teach us an awful lot about how we can go about that most effectively.
That's interesting. It's one thing I've noticed in the last 10 years, actually, many more students, from China in particular, and as you say, the subcontinent, and as you say, the opportunities that produces are incredible, especially some are coming for very short periods as well, so not even whole degrees, but just sort of exchange programs and things like that. So thank you for that. I wondered what encourages you particularly in your work. Do you have stories? You've mentioned a couple already. Do you have stories of people coming to faith? I know you're representing so many different people. That's probably a broad question, but are there any particular ones that stand out for you?
I think there's a couple in the last year which have been wonderful simply because they're typical in some ways. They sort of stand out as examples of what we see round and about the place. The most recent would have been I was speaking at the Events Week at Warwick University just a couple of weeks ago, 3 weeks ago. And it was in lots of ways a fairly typical university events week. It felt like the week started slightly slowly. The CU, I think, were working out what's this events week like about, particularly the first years who'd not done it before. They were feeling their way. I think they were probably testing me out a little bit as a speaker. Like, can I trust this guy to bring my friends along too? And I think that's standard and normal and good. And I think I convinced them. I was pleased to see numbers grow through the week, and I think they felt, okay, no, I can bring friends to listen to this guy. But what was interesting was they'd in the past, Warwick University CU had always had a marquee in the middle of their university campus, right, really obvious, and they were able to flyer their whole campus, like hand out flyers, and people would just walk in. This year, for the first time, they didn't have that. They had a room in a building, which was less obvious. And as a result, I think they realized as the week went on that they needed to rely on actually inviting their friends to come, like relying on the relationships they already had. And about a third of the way through the week, one of the CU committee, I know she admitted that she sort of invited her friend along kind of out of duty. She sort of felt like, I should invite someone. I'm one of the CU leaders, so I better invite someone. Invited a couple of course mates along, and one who she'd invited who she did not expect to come. Here's the big theme. She just did not expect him to come. Came along to the event, and she didn't expect him to engage. And he engaged really, really lively in discussions during the event, and she didn't expect him to respond. He prayed with me to accept Christ that evening. He'd been along to a few things in the past, but this was really the first time he'd properly really heard it. She was sort of thinking, I don't know if he really understood what he's done here. And then on the Saturday night, he messaged her and said, so are you going to invite me to church? Can I come? And it's like, oh yeah, no, I should do that, shouldn't I? And he's been along to church with her each week since. So it's what's the theme that's interesting there, and seems to be a theme we're seeing more, is the surprise of Christian friends at how easy it is to invite their friends to come and hear. So the openness that we've already talked about, that students are exhibiting, is perhaps taking some of the Christian students by surprise. And the Christian students are perhaps a little bit cautious, perhaps worried that they're going to face opposition, and then finding that actually that their invitation, it's not just received, it's welcome. Another example would be a student. We've told her story before, so we've called her Caris, but that's not her real name. Up in the northeast of England, who her friend in the Christian Union felt prompted to pray for 3 friends for the year, to pray for opportunities to share Jesus, and so she went praying for her friends, and no opportunities came for the first term, and she was feeling frustrated. But her CU staff worker, her UCCF staff member working with her, encouraged her to keep praying, persevere. The Lord answers perseverant prayer. So she kept praying, and she found the first half of term all the way up to the events week, still very little. Round the events week, there was a bit of an opportunity. She invited the friends, but not very much opportunity. They were quite closed to any conversation. But then after one of the events that one of her friends, this Caris, came to, suddenly the conversation opened up. And her friend started talking to her all about her faith, her experience of the Lord, about the Lord Jesus. And Caris became more and more interested. And eventually, her CU friend plucked up the courage to read Luke's Gospel with her. We use Luke's Gospel in a package we call Uncover. It's essentially the text of Luke's Gospel with 6 kind of seeker studies to do with a friend over a coffee. And Caris said, "I thought you'd never ask." And the CU friend, reflecting on it afterwards, said, "I was surprised by how straightforward it was to make that invitation, and then how straightforward it was to open Luke's Gospel with my friends. I thought it was going to be really hard work, and it actually ended up being a lot easier than I expected." And I think it's an interesting tension in evangelism, and I hope this is something that will relate to those who are listening. So I think it's right. It is hard. There is a crossing. When Rico Tice calls it crossing the pain line, doesn't he? There's a thing where it takes us to say, sometimes saying the name of Jesus aloud to someone who doesn't trust him as Lord feels a really hard thing to do. But the Lord is the one who prepares hearts, and we will find, I think he promises this, that some of those we talk to don't go, "I don't want to hear a word," and respond negatively, but go, "Please tell me more. We want to hear you again on this." That's what the people in Athens said to Paul in Acts 17, isn't it? We want to hear you again. And I think somehow giving confidence to Christians that they can expect that is something that's one of the main things we want to do in UCCF for Christian students. And I'd want to communicate more broadly to anyone listening that we're in a time where openness is growing, and God has already promised that even in non-open times, some will respond and say, "Yes, please, I want to hear more." So keep going.
So how can people listening to this get involved and back their local CU? If they're in a city where there's a university or a further education college, how can local churches and local Christians get involved and support student mission in their city and in the UK more widely? And where can they find out about UCCF?
Well, finding out about UCCF, the best way to do it is to look online. If you Google UCCF, it will come up as a website, but uccf.org.uk is where you can find out loads about all that we do. In terms of supporting Christian unions, I guess if you're in a university city, there is a Christian union in your city, and there is almost certainly a UCCF staff worker in your city too. And I sort of want to ask, do you know their name? Can you pray for them? They may be in your church, and you might not even fully realize you're a co-church member with a UCCF staff worker working with multiple Christian unions in your city, potentially, if you have more than one university. So do you know their name? Can you pray for them? But also, do you know the name of the CU leaders? There will be CU leaders in your city. Can you pray for them? But if you're not in a university city, I saw online a church that I know quite well. I was part of a church in North London for a few years. It's nowhere near a university, that had a focused week of prayer for 2 university CUs in particular during their events week, just over the last couple of weeks, because members of their church are now university students. And so they've realized they've got these university students who are members of their church who are now have the opportunity to be on mission in their universities. And so they're praying hard. So please pray for us. I think that would be the first thing. And then are there ways in which you could support us and partner with us? We want people to feel that they're able to be part of this ministry that sometimes feels like it's slightly hidden away in universities, but is doing amazing things, and the Lord is at work in amazing ways. On average, every events week that I've heard from over the last few weeks has seen 4, 5, 6 people profess faith for the first time. That's what we saw in Warwick. That's what's happened in Cambridge a couple of weeks ago, in Oxford. Sometimes it's more than that number. But that's replicated 50, 60, 70, 80 times. And people may not know that that's what's happening. But we do need the resources that we can use to resource those students and to enable them to do that mission in 3D, delighting in displaying and declaring Jesus as boldly as possible. So if people listening with us could partner with us, they can find details on how to do that on the website. If they look up uccf.org.uk, then that would be a wonderful thing. We would praise God for for every person who did that.
Well, thank you so much. I think that's a lovely piece to finish on. I think what struck me is in this conversation, one is the sort of how unusual the period of being a student is, as you say, things being up in the air, and actually this great openness, which is a real opportunity to share the gospel. And students, in one sense, are a really important group because they'll go around and some will have influential roles. But as you say, you've made a more universal point, which I really like as well, that just the delighting, displaying and declaring Jesus, that's something that applies to every demographic and group we can think of, and that real challenge. And the other thing that really struck me is your point about just simply inviting people. And, as you say, mission can be hard, evangelism can feel hard, but it's God at work. And he may well surprise us, as you said, and actually does. And we're seeing this on campuses around the UK, people saying, tell me more, and showing that really God is moving. So that's a wonderful encouragement to us. So I really hope this conversation will inspire us to all think and pray about how we might connect more with students better. Thank you again, Matt, for sharing that with us. And thank you all for listening. Do tune in again in a couple of weeks for another inspiring guest on the PEP Talk podcast from SOLAS.